This was a range of crimson and yellow mountains, on top of a towering peak. Several figures stood against the wind. Despite the fierce gales whipping up storms, the 5 figures remained as motionless as boulders. Not even their clothes fluttered in the onslaught of the storm. Among them, the leader leaned against a massive rock, his gaze lazily directed toward the depths of the mountains. From time to time, violent surges of spiritual energy shot up into the sky. This figure wore a white robe, his tall frame exuding handsomeness. A warm smile lingered at the corner of his mouth, giving off a gentle aura. His black hair fluttered in the wind. Behind him, the other 4 figures had distinct presences, though they still seemed somewhat dull in comparison to his extraordinary appearance and temperament. This was Xian of the Sacred Spirit Academy. Captain, the battle over there seems to be nearing its end. There are still 12 teams left, and they're all quite powerful. At least 12 of them are experts who've overcome the physical body tribulation, a young man with golden hair said, squinting at the distant mountains. Xian smiled and nodded. 12 teams, sounds like quite the feast. I wonder if we'll get stuffed. With you here, Captain, even teams with experts in spiritual energy tribulation will have to take a detour. The rest of the teams are easy to crush. A burly man with a bear-like build chuckled. However, the fierce scar on his face made his otherwise jovial expression seem a bit menacing. This Spiritual Academy Grand Competition is full of hidden talents. The waters run deep. If we're too careless, we might just capsize, Xian said with a faint smile, his deep eyes fixed on the horizon. It's said that many spiritual academies have secretly invited talented figures from prominent clans. While most of them haven't revealed themselves yet, as the competition progresses, these hidden powerhouses will undoubtedly emerge. That will be when the real battle begins. And even without them, the other 4 major spiritual academies still have teams that rival ours. Haven't we been constantly suppressed by Wen Qingxuan's team from the 10,000 Phoenixes Spiritual Academy throughout this whole competition? At the mention of Wen Qingxuan, the expressions of the 4 people behind Xian grew a bit serious. Since the competition began, Wen Qingxuan's team had dominated the top spot with overwhelming strength. Though the current ranking didn't determine the final outcome, the fact that they had maintained first place for so long was enough to show their formidable power. I've heard that Wen Qingxuan is a rare beauty. A young man chuckled. Captain, didn't you once join the Spirit Road with her? What's the matter? With your charm, couldn't you win over this proud phoenix? Xian shrugged helplessly. She's one of the few girls I fear in the Spirit Road. And besides, beauty tricks don't seem to work on her. Wait, so there are other girls who make you wary? Who could be on par with Wen Qingxuan? The golden-haired young man caught on to something and asked with curiosity. Xian fell silent for a moment, the warm smile on his face dimming slightly. A complex shadow flickered in his eyes as he slowly spoke. The other one is named Luoli. Her brilliance is not inferior to Wen Qingxuan's, but her nature is different. She doesn't care much about rankings. In his mind, he saw a black-dressed girl carrying a long sword, her hair as bright as the Milky Way, radiating with brilliance. Her translucent eyes, like glazed glass, could captivate anyone. If Wen Qingxuan was a proud and noble phoenix, unyielding to anyone, then Luoli was like a black lotus blooming alone in a secluded valley, offering her stunning beauty only to the one she favored. She possessed the same innate talent as Wen Qingxuan. If she desired, she could also bask in the same dazzling light. However, she remained quietly by the side of that one person, her eyes always calm when looking at others. It was only when she gazed at him that ripples would form in her gaze, a rare softness in the girl, enough to make countless men fall for her. Xian's palms slowly clenched, his fingers digging into the massive rock as though it were made of tofu. His gaze lowered, eyes cold. Luoli. Before Mu Chun became his mortal enemy, he had actually met Luoli once. At that time, she was being hunted down by a group of troublesome pursuers. He saw her from a distance, but he merely watched, for his rationality told him that intervening in such matters on the Spirit Road was foolish. Besides, he was never one to show mercy, and it would be too dangerous for him to save someone and end up in peril himself. So he observed coldly. This was a range of crimson and yellow mountains, on top of a towering peak. Several figures stood against the wind. Despite the fierce gales whipping up storms, the 5 figures remained as motionless as boulders. Not even their clothes fluttered in the onslaught of the storm. Among them, the leader leaned against a massive rock, his gaze lazily directed toward the depths of the mountains. From time to time, violent surges of spiritual energy shot up into the sky. This figure wore a white robe, his tall frame exuding handsomeness. A warm smile lingered at the corner of his mouth, giving off a gentle aura. His black hair fluttered in the wind. Behind him, the other 4 figures had distinct presences, though they still seemed somewhat dull in comparison to his extraordinary appearance and temperament. This was Ji Xian of the Sacred Spirit Academy. Captain, the battle over there seems to be nearing its end. There are still 12 teams left, and they're all quite powerful. At least 12 of them are experts who've overcome the physical body tribulation, a young man with golden hair said, squinting at the distant mountains. Ji Xian smiled and nodded. 12 teams, sounds like quite the feast. I wonder if we'll get stuffed. With you here, Captain, even teams with experts in spiritual energy tribulation will have to take a detour. The rest of the teams are easy to crush. A burly man with a bear-like build chuckled. However, the fierce scar on his face made his otherwise jovial expression seem a bit menacing. This Spiritual Academy Grand Competition is full of hidden talents. The waters run deep. If we're too careless, we might just capsize, Ji Xian said with a faint smile, his deep eyes fixed on the horizon. It's said that many spiritual academies have secretly invited talented figures from prominent clans. While most of them haven't revealed themselves yet, as the competition progresses, these hidden powerhouses will undoubtedly emerge. That will be when the real battle begins. And even without them, the other 4 major spiritual academies still have teams that rival ours. Haven't we been constantly suppressed by Wen Qingxuan's team from the 10,000 Phoenixes Spiritual Academy throughout this whole competition? At the mention of Wen Qingxuan, the expressions of the 4 people behind Ji Xian grew a bit serious. Since the competition began, Wen Qingxuan's team had dominated the top spot with overwhelming strength. Though the current ranking didn't determine the final outcome, the fact that they had maintained first place for so long was enough to show their formidable power. I've heard that Wen Qingxuan is a rare beauty. A young man chuckled. Captain, didn't you once join the Spirit Road with her? What's the matter? With your charm, couldn't you win over this proud phoenix? Ji Xian shrugged helplessly. She's one of the few girls I fear in the Spirit Road. And besides, beauty tricks don't seem to work on her. Wait, so there are other girls who make you wary? Who could be on par with Wen Qingxuan? The golden-haired young man caught on to something and asked with curiosity. Ji Xian fell silent for a moment, the warm smile on his face dimming slightly. A complex shadow flickered in his eyes as he slowly spoke. The other one is named Luoli. Her brilliance is not inferior to Wen Qingxuan's, but her nature is different. She doesn't care much about rankings. In his mind, he saw a black-dressed girl carrying a long sword, her hair as bright as the Milky Way, radiating with brilliance. Her translucent eyes, like glazed glass, could captivate anyone. If Wen Qingxuan was a proud and noble phoenix, unyielding to anyone, then Luoli was like a black lotus blooming alone in a secluded valley, offering her stunning beauty only to the one she favored. She possessed the same innate talent as Wen Qingxuan. If she desired, she could also bask in the same dazzling light. However, she remained quietly by the side of that one person, her eyes always calm when looking at others. It was only when she gazed at him that ripples would form in her gaze, a rare softness in the girl, enough to make countless men fall for her. Ji Xian's palms slowly clenched, his fingers digging into the massive rock as though it were made of tofu. His gaze lowered, eyes cold. Luoli. Before Mu Chun became his mortal enemy, he had actually met Luoli once. At that time, she was being hunted down by a group of troublesome pursuers. He saw her from a distance, but he merely watched, for his rationality told him that intervening in such matters on the Spirit Road was foolish. Besides, he was never one to show mercy, and it would be too dangerous for him to save someone and end up in peril himself. So he observed coldly. I'll make sure he's beyond redemption. The 4 youths trembled slightly at the intensity in Ji Xian's eyes, and before they could speak, the academy tokens in their hands suddenly glowed brightly. They quickly looked toward them, their faces changing as they gasped in surprise. Huh? Why has Xiaoho's team disappeared? The Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy's team suddenly surged ahead. Hearing this, Ji Xian's pupils constricted, and he clenched his hand, the Academy token appearing in his grip. His gaze then froze on the newly appeared team. 9th place in the Spiritual Academy Grand Competition, Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy, team leader, Mu Chun. The atmosphere atop the mountain seemed to freeze in that moment. Ji Xian's eyes locked onto the glaring name on the Academy token. The warm smile on his face completely vanished. He extended his finger, expressionless, to rub over the name. Though he said nothing, the 4 people behind him could feel an overwhelming killing intent radiating from him. The youth named Mu Feng, who vaguely knew about the grudge between Ji Xian and Mu Chun, shrugged and said with a smile, "Looks like your rival has appeared." Ji Xian replied flatly, "I don't even know if he still qualifies to be my rival." The team led by Xiaoho disappeared from the top 16. The blonde youth frowned and said, "And now this Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy team has surged up." At this point, a look of astonishment passed through his eyes. Could it be that Xiaoho's team was defeated by this Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy team? That's unlikely. Xiaoho's team is also incredibly strong, and he himself has already surpassed the Spiritual Energy Tribulation. Although the Spiritual Academy Grand Competition has many hidden talents, there shouldn't be many who can easily defeat them, said the large, burly man, also frowning. Ji Xian shook his head, his tone indifferent. No need to guess. Xiaoho's team was indeed defeated by Mu Chen's team. Didn't you see the Academy token doesn't have their direction anymore? That means they must have entered some ruins. Mu Feng and the others looked over, and indeed noticed that there was no direction marker for Mu Chun or Xiaoho's teams. Those unlucky guys really lost face this time. They were defeated by Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. Let's see if they dare act so high and mighty in front of us in the future. The blonde youth sneered, showing a hint of schadenfreude. Even though they were from the Sacred Spirit Academy, they weren't known for being friendly within the academy and had a lot of internal conflicts. Seeing Xiaoho and his team in trouble made them feel a little vindicated. Mu Feng glanced at Ji Xian, whose eyes were cold and distant, and smiled. Should we find them now? I don't think they can stay hidden in the ruins forever. Once they come out, we'll be able to track them down. Ji Xian's hand absently rubbed the Academy token as his gaze remained fixed on the name. After a moment, he shook his head and said, "No need. If he really has the ability, we'll eventually cross paths. If he doesn't even have the strength to last until then, he's not worth my attention." Mu Feng nodded. At the moment, they really shouldn't waste time on Mu Chen's team. It's about time. Prepare to act. Remember, don't leave anyone alive. Ji Xian looked toward the depths of the mountain. The violent spiritual energy fluctuations there had weakened considerably, indicating that the battle there was drawing to a close. He waved his hand and spoke coldly. As his palm swung down, 4 figures swiftly shot out behind him, moving like lightning. Their figures cut through the air, unleashing overwhelming spiritual energy that swept through the mountains like a storm, creating a violent and unmatchable hurricane. Ji Xian watched their retreating figures, slightly tilting his head as he gazed towards the distant north. A cold, blade-like gleam flickered in his eyes. "Mu Chun, keep walking forward. When you reach me, you'll understand the immense gap between us. This time, I'll make sure you never rise again." Ji Xian clenched his fist tightly. With a heavy stomp of his foot, a loud boom echoed as his figure shot into the sky like a streak of light. In an instant, he overtook the 4 figures, his speed so fast, it was like a startled swan taking flight. After his departure, the mountain trembled violently. Cracks spread rapidly across the peak, ultimately affecting the entire mountain. In a thunderous crash, massive boulders tumbled down, and the mountain collapsed, sending dust and debris into the sky. At the moment Ji Xian and his group moved, far in the distance, there was an area that seemed to be a gathering point. In the valley, hundreds of teams had gathered to complete various transactions. Here, there was an unwritten rule: no fighting, for doing so would attract the hostile gaze of many. The valley was bustling with noise, yet many teams' gazes lingered toward the cliff above, where a particularly dazzling figure stood. The figure was incredibly slender. Dressed in golden battle armor that tightly wrapped around her curvy and delicate body, it highlighted her enticing silhouette. Beneath her battle skirt were long, straight legs, their jade-like sheen causing countless eyes to be fixated on her. Her long hair cascaded down like a waterfall, reaching her rounded hips. Her jade-like arms were crossed in front of her, which only accentuated her figure, drawing even more attention. In the valley, many swallowed nervously. Although this enchanting figure caused countless hearts to race, no one dared to act too boldly. Some even had fear in their eyes, for the girl before them was Wen Qingxuan, the captain of the team currently ranked first on the Spiritual Academy Grand Competition scoreboard. Though her figure was slender and graceful, everyone knew the terrifying power hidden within her delicate body. However, at this moment, the girl, the center of attention, seemed unbothered by the gazes in the valley. Her beautiful eyes were thoughtful as she stared at the academy token in her hand, more specifically at the team that had just climbed the rankings. Northsong Spiritual Academy, Chen. Wen Qingxuan's eyes narrowed slightly, and this small movement only added to her charm. That's the Blood Calamity instigator of Spirit Road? Wen Qingxuan smiled with interest. Though she hadn't met Chen in Spirit Road, she had certainly heard of the Blood Calamity. Most importantly, it seemed that Chen was with Luoli. Since he's the captain of this team, then Luoli should be with them as well, Wen Qingxuan mused, resting her delicate chin in her white hand, her beautiful eyes gleaming with excitement. Captain, is our next target the Northsong Spiritual Academy team? Two girls behind Wen Qingxuan asked in sweet voices. Both girls were dressed in dark green attire, their beauty matching perfectly, revealing they were identical twins. They noticed Wen Qingxuan's rare excitement and couldn't help but ask curiously. Wen Qingxuan smiled gracefully, her head slightly nodding. Xun'er, Xun'er, keep an eye on that team. As soon as we get their location, we'll change direction and find them. The two girls exchanged a glance, some confusion in their eyes. Won't that delay our plans? Focusing so much on one team didn't seem to align with Wen Qingxuan's previous strategy. Wen Qingxuan tilted her head, her long, delicate hand gently lifting one girl's chin. With a playful smile, she said, compared to her, no plan matters. Wen Qingxuan lifted her delicate face slightly, gazing into the distance. She extended her long, jade-like hand and gently clenched it. Then, a captivating smile appeared on her face, a smile so enchanting that it seemed to steal the very light of day. Down in the valley below, countless people couldn't help but swallow, their throats making audible gulping sounds. This noble and proud phoenix before them was enough to stir anyone's soul. Though everyone knew that taming this phoenix was nearly impossible, the more unattainable something is, the more it itches in a man's heart. The burning gazes from the valley finally caught Wen Qingxuan's attention. Her long eyelashes fluttered slightly, and her beautiful eyes swept downward. When her gaze shot in their direction, the people in the valley immediately felt a shiver down their spines. They hastily averted their eyes. No matter how charming the young woman appeared, they all clearly understood the terrifying power she possessed. This woman is something else. However, not everyone seemed to be avoiding her. On the edge of the valley, a team still stared at her with intense eyes. This team was not weak. Their leader, though not at the spiritual energy tribulation stage, was comparable to people like Tang Meyer. Among his 4 members, 2 had surpassed the physical body tribulation. Their strength was such that it rivaled even the top teams of the 5 great academies. Although their lineup was formidable, the surrounding teams couldn't help but glance at them with pity before quietly retreating. Above the valley, Wen Qingxuan's eyes also turned toward the team. Then, a charming smile appeared on her exquisite face, and a captivating, melodious voice rang out. Really? The leader of the team stiffened. He clearly hadn't expected their hushed conversation to be overheard by Wen Qingxuan. He let out an awkward laugh. Then, in the next moment, his figure shot back as he and his 4 teammates hurriedly followed. Wen Qingxuan watched this scene with a smile. Then, with a graceful step, her vast spiritual energy surged, and behind her, massive wings of glowing light seemed to form. Whoosh! The wings fluttered, and her figure vanished like a phantom. Boom! In that instant when she disappeared, terrifying spiritual energy swept through the air. 5 figures flew backward, coughing up blood, their faces filled with shock and horror. SSS. Wen Qingxuan appeared in front of the disrespectful team leader like a ghost. Her jade hand reached out and grasped his neck. Looking at his terrified expression, her sexy red lips curled into a seductive smile. She then slapped him in the chest, sending him crashing into the valley. Her body floated away as she moved effortlessly. His score is yours now. As she disappeared, her melodious laughter echoed in the distance. Above the valley, her graceful figures became streaks of light as they chased after the slender and captivating figure far ahead. In the valley, many eyes lingered on the retreating figure. After a long while, they snapped out of it, and malicious looks turned toward the unlucky leader who had been severely injured by Wen Qingxuan's single blow. Inside the giant hall, the aftermath of the previous battle left the place in ruins. Chen slowly descended from midair. His face appeared slightly pale, but his eyes still exuded a cold, sharp gaze. As his gaze swept across the room, even Xun'er's expression tightened slightly. Deep within his eyes, there was a trace of caution. The move Chen had used to defeat Xiahou earlier had even shocked him. He knew that if that attack had been aimed at him, his fate wouldn't have been any better than Xiahou's. The 4 remaining members of the Sacred Spirit Academy team glared angrily at Chen. They glanced at Xiahou, who was badly injured and unconscious, then back at the cold-eyed Chen. Though they wanted to take action, they found their feet frozen, a heavy fear coiling around their hearts. That previous battle had left them deeply shaken. Still trapped by the creeping vines, Tang Mayer and Zhou Yuan stared in shock at the scene before them. After a long pause, they finally took a sharp breath and suppressed the astonishment in their hearts, looking at Chen with wide eyes. Clearly, the outcome was completely unexpected. Although they had never underestimated Chen from the beginning, the difference in power was undeniable. After all, Xiahou had already passed the spiritual energy tribulation, and Chen's strength was far behind. This gap wasn't something that could be easily bridged. Yet, Chen had shown them what a miracle truly looked like. Chen glanced around the massive hall before his eyes met Luo Li's. On her delicate, porcelain-like face, a faint smile appeared. Chen had not let her efforts go to waste. With Xiahou now incapacitated, the situation would surely turn in their favor. Heh, truly impressive. A cold, mocking voice echoed through the hall. Chen turned his head to face Xun'er, frowning slightly. From Xun'er's expression, there was not a trace of panic. No wonder you became the captain of this team. Looks like I underestimated you, Xun'er said with a faint smile. Luo Li rose gracefully, her jade-like hand gripping the Luo god sword. Her clear, beautiful eyes glinted with coldness as she stared at Xun'er. While only she and Chen were capable of taking action in this moment, if a fight broke out, Xun'er and his group wouldn't have the upper hand. Did you really think that defeating Xiahou would change the tide? Xun'er sneered, his eyes flashing with derision. I admit that your divine sword is impressive, but don't take me for a fool. If I had no other means, do you think I'd sit here and wait for you to deal with Xiahou before coming after us? Oh, then what's your plan? Chen asked with a slight smile, his internal spiritual energy already circulating. The battle with Xiahou had drained him significantly, and using powerful techniques like the thunder control art would likely be impossible in the short term. But with Xiahou gone, Xun'er's side clearly lacked the strength they once had. Xun'er's smile remained, but it was strangely unsettling. Luo Li stood side by side with Chen, her jade hand firmly grasping the Luo god sword. Her gaze locked coldly onto Xun'er. Tang Mayer and the others held their breath, watching the confrontation. They could sense something was off. Despite facing both Chen and Luo Li, Xun'er showed no fear. On the contrary, he seemed confident, as if he had absolute certainty that he could suppress them both. Although worried, the trap group had no choice but to hope that Chen and Luo Li could truly defeat Xun'er and break the deadly vines. Swish! Luo Li and Chen exchanged a glance, and in the next instant, Luo Li shot forward like a comet. A sharp, unmatchable sword chi swept through the air, cutting through it with such force that it seemed to split the very atmosphere. The blade headed straight for Xun'er. Xun'er slapped the ground, his body leaping into the air. His sleeve flicked, and a surge of black light erupted, transforming into a massive, withered black tree that collided directly with the sword chi. Boom! A loud crash rang out as shattered wood flew in all directions. The black tree cracked, but the dark energy still managed to deflect the sword chi. Xun'er drifted back, and his 4 team members fixed their cold, murderous gazes on Chen and Luo Li. Overwhelming spiritual energy spread through the hall, ready for battle. You're really impatient, Xun'er commented, his sleeves flicking to disperse the black light. He glanced at Mu Chen and Luo Li with a sinister look in his eyes, a grin spreading across his face. I know you're wondering why I'm so calm after you took down Xiahou. Well, now I'll tell you, it's because I needed time. And now, time is up. His grin twisted into something more menacing. Next, it's time for you to face hopeless despair. As soon as the words left his mouth, his hands moved swiftly, forming complex hand seals. Behind him, his 4 teammates mirrored the same seals. In an instant, dark green spiritual energy surged from their bodies, flooding the hall like a tidal wave. It rushed toward the massive, jade-colored wooden statue at the far end of the hall. Amidst the barrage of attacks, the enormous azure wood statue suddenly burst into dazzling light. Complex patterns spread across its massive form, and to everyone's shock, the statue began to slowly rise. At the same time, a terrifying wave of energy emanated from within the statue. Mu Chen and Luo Li exchanged a glance, their expressions changing. Luo Li's jade-like hand gripped her long sword, and with a powerful sword aura, she swung it toward Xun'er and his group, sending a barrage of strikes slicing through the air. Boom! Xun'er, seeing this, sneered coldly, stomping his foot. Countless vines shot forward, forming a protective shield in front of them. The sword energy crashed against it, splintering wood into the air. Haha, the Divine Wood Guard is now under my control. No matter what tricks you have left, today you will die without a doubt. Wood shards scattered in every direction as Xun'er's eyes burned with fervor, staring at the azure wood statue rising in the center of the grand hall. Laughing maniacally, he declared, Mu Chen, you thought you could turn the tide by taking down Xiahou, but you didn't know I was stalling for time as well. Ha ha ha, it seems that I am the one with the upper hand. The Divine Wood Guard stood tall, its towering form exuding an overwhelming pressure. Its withered wooden body shimmered with glowing patterns and radiated an extremely terrifying wave of energy. As it took a step, the entire grand hall trembled. In the midst of the vines, Tang Mayer and the others paled as they gazed at the scene. The enormous shadow loomed over them, sending a chill of death's threat. They finally understood why, even after Xiahou's defeat, Xun'er remained calm and unmoving. From the start, he had no intention of directly confronting Mu Chen and the others. He had been stalling for time, using the vines to drain their spiritual energy and activate this terrifying Divine Wood Guard. Now that the Divine Wood Guard was fully under their control, nearly every aspect of the situation had fallen into their hands. There was no chance of turning things around. Mu Chen and Luo Li stared gravely at the Divine Wood Guard, sensing its immense power. Although it hadn't reached the level of a supreme powerhouse, it was still far more formidable than someone at the spiritual energy tribulation stage. Although our strength is still insufficient to fully unleash this Divine Wood Guard's power, the coming battle will still make you feel what true despair is. Xun'er laughed aloud, his pale youthful face filled with triumph. He waved his sleeve, and with a change in hand seals, a leaf-shaped light rune appeared on the statue's forehead. The Divine Wood Guard began to move, taking massive steps toward Mu Chen and Luo Li. With a powerful swing of its enormous fist, a torrent of spiritual energy surged toward them, overwhelming them both. Swoosh! Mu Chen and Luo Li rapidly retreated, and with a snap of his hand, the dragon-devouring demonic spear materialized in his grasp. The spear's bloodthirsty aura surged as a piercing spear shadow shot forth at lightning speed, striking the Divine Wood Guard's body. However, the attack only left a shallow mark. Whoosh! Luo Li's jade hand gripped her sword, sending a series of sharp sword chi surging toward the Divine Wood Guard. The sword energy tore through its body, leaving deep gashes about a foot long. While this power was significantly stronger than Mu Chen's attack, it was still no match for the Divine Wood Guard's colossal body, which remained largely unharmed. The Divine Wood Guard clearly possessed an incredibly powerful defense. Haha, your resistance is pointless. Now that the Divine Wood Guard is under my control, unless you're someone with the power to overcome the Divine Soul Tribulation, you cannot destroy it. Xun'er laughed loudly. Once Mu Chen and the others were dealt with, he would finally possess the Divine Wood Guard. At that point, not only would he discover the true location of the Wood God Hall, but with the Guard's power, who in the Spiritual Academy Grand Competition could stop them. This year's champion would undoubtedly belong to their Wood Spirit Academy. Tang Mayer, Zhou Yuan, Su Huang, and the others watched the mighty Divine Wood Guard, their eyes filled with helplessness and bitterness. The situation truly seemed like a deadlock now. With the strength of the Divine Wood Guard, it could sweep everything before it. Inside the giant hall, the massive Divine Wood Guard stood tall, exuding an overwhelming sense of pressure. It was as if the very spiritual energy flowing through the hall was beginning to stagnate, and the air itself was thick with the weight of its immense power. This divine wood guard possessed an extraordinarily powerful strength. Haha, Mu Chen, weren't you quite powerful earlier? How about facing me in this divine wood guard now? Xun'er laughed as he watched the scene. With the divine wood guard in his hands, he was finally at ease. No matter what means Mu Chen and the others still had up their sleeves, there was absolutely no chance for them to turn the tables now. Mu Chen frowned as he stared at the divine wood guard. Its enormous body resembled withered wood, with glowing lines of light running across it. The overwhelming force radiating from it caused his skin to prickle, a sign that his physical body was sensing danger. Clearly, this divine wood guard possessed a terrifying strength, one that even his 4-rune thunder body might not be able to withstand. The divine wood guard before him might even be comparable to someone who has overcome the divine soul tribulation, and according to Xun'er, this wasn't even all of its power. The situation was indeed much worse than before. Now, you can die. Xun'er grinned, his eyes full of cold malice as he looked at Mu Chen and Luoli. He immediately performed a hand seal, and the leaf-like glow on the divine wood guard's forehead flickered. With a thunderous roar, the massive figure shot forward, its giant fist carrying an unimaginable force, heading straight for Mu Chen and Luoli. Mu Chen's body flickered, and a dragon shadow appeared beneath his feet. In the blink of an eye, he retreated rapidly, with Luoli also darting away at an incredible speed. Boom! The divine wood guard's fist slammed into the ground, causing the entire hall to shake violently. Huge cracks, like snakes, spread rapidly across the floor. The destructive power was enough to send chills down anyone's spine. Whoosh! The punch missed, and the divine wood guard's forehead flickered again. Its enormous body darted forward with incredible speed, appearing right in front of Mu Chen. Clearly, it not only had astounding strength but also impressive speed. The divine wood guard threw another punch, and the air itself seemed to explode beneath its strike. Mu Chen's expression changed slightly as he gripped the dragon-devouring demonic spear. With a powerful surge of killing intent, it transformed into a massive demonic dragon, its dark energy colliding with the divine wood guard's fist. Boom! The force of the impact created a storm-like shockwave, causing the ground beneath Mu Chen to collapse. His body was thrown backward, but the dragon-devouring demonic spear returned to his hand as his sleeves were torn to shreds. A crimson bloodstain appeared at the corner of his mouth, evidence that he had sustained injuries from clashing directly with the divine wood guard. The divine wood guard's massive form charged at Mu Chen once more, its withered fist descending like a shadow. Whoosh! However, just as the divine wood guard was about to attack again, a graceful figure suddenly darted from above, a torrent of sharp sword energy screaming down, aiming straight at the divine wood guard's forehead. Sensing the deadly sword energy, the divine wood guard abruptly halted its attack. It raised its giant hand, blocking the incoming sword energy. As the energy rushed past, it left a deep scar across its withered palm. Though the divine wood guard boasted impressive defensive power, it was clear that Luo Li's Luo God sword was not something that could be easily deflected. If Luo Li's strength were even greater, and she truly unleashed the power of the Luo God sword, which was a divine artifact of the Luo God clan, perhaps a single strike would have been enough to sever the divine wood guard's massive hand. Below, Mu Chen took the opportunity to retreat, though his brow furrowed slightly. The divine wood guard's defense was incredibly strong. Earlier, it had directly withstood both his and Luo Li's attacks, but now it had chosen to defend against Luo Li's strike. This may have been due to some caution regarding the power of the Luo God sword, but it was likely not the only reason. Mu Chen's eyes gleamed as his gaze unconsciously lingered on the leaf-shaped rune on the divine wood guard's forehead. He then glanced at Xun'er. Every time this guy manipulated the divine wood guard with hand seals, the rune on its forehead seemed to glow. That leaf-shaped rune was the same one Xun'er had previously taken from them. It now seemed that this rune was the key to controlling the divine wood guard, explaining why Xun'er had bypassed the celestial spirit tree and gone straight for the unassuming rune. Luo Li floated down and landed beside Mu Chen. Mu Chen shook his head slightly. Fortunately, his thunder god body had reached the level of the 4-rune thunder body. Otherwise, had anyone with the strength to endure the physical body tribulation taken the previous punch from the divine wood guard, they would likely have been severely injured. Haha, looks like you guys really can't stir up any waves today, Xun'er said, watching as Mu Chen and Luo Li were forced to retreat step by the divine wood guard. Luo Li's beautiful eyes flashed with cold light. She gripped the Luo God sword tightly in her jade-like hand, her voice carrying a hint of frost. "Are you sure it's too early for you to be happy? Do you really think I can't break your lousy wooden guard?" A trace of anger crossed the delicate, stunning face of the young woman. Mu Chen had already fought a battle with Xiahou earlier, so he was bound to be in poor condition. He had also exchanged a blow with the Divine Wood Guard just before. It seemed like he had sustained some injuries, which made her feel a bit distressed, but it also stirred a rising killing intent within her. As soon as her words fell, the Luo God's sword in her hand emitted a tremendous sword hum. Light runes rapidly spread across the blade, and a sharp, overwhelming force seemed to make the very space tremble. In the distance, Qing sensed the piercing sword intent, and his expression slightly changed. He then snorted coldly. This divine sword was indeed powerful. If Luo Li had the spiritual energy tribulation at this moment, she might actually pose a threat to the Divine Wood Guard. But unfortunately, truly courting death. Qing sneered, his hand sealing the air with changing handprints. The Divine Wood Guard once again rushed out, unleashing a terrifying offensive. However, as Qing activated the Divine Wood Guard, Mu Chen clearly saw the tree pattern rune seal on the guard's forehead flickering again. Luo Li's beautiful face was cold as she prepared to break the seal on the Luo God's sword and destroy the Divine Wood Guard before her. "Wait," Mu Chen said, reaching out to stop her. Luo Li's hidden abilities must be powerful, but once used, they would likely drain her greatly. If they spent too much energy to destroy this Divine Wood Guard now, Qing and his group would be able to sit back and wait for them to exhaust themselves. The situation would become even worse then. "You just need to handle the Divine Wood Guard's attacks. I'll take care of the rest," Mu Chen said softly. Luo Li, hearing this, looked at him with a hint of confusion, clearly not understanding what he intended to do. But, trusting Mu Chen, she hesitated slightly and then nodded. "Be careful. If you get injured again, I'll step in." Her voice was firm, with no room for argument. Mu Chen smiled and couldn't resist gently caressing the soft, delicate cheek of the young woman. "Got it. My Luo Li is the Luo King of Spirit Road. So cool." Seeing that Mu Chen still had the mood to tease her, Luo Li couldn't help but glare at him, though her gaze was as soft as spring water. "You still have time for flirting?" Qing's cold laugh echoed through the air. As he changed his hand seals, the massive shadow cast by the Divine Wood Guard had already engulfed Mu Chen and Luo Li. The terrifying power surged like a storm. Boom, boom. Inside the giant hall, the storm raged, with the Divine Wood Guard rampaging through it like a force of destruction. Mu Chen and Luo Li, resembling flies around it, used their extraordinary movement techniques to dodge the guard's attacks, while also launching their own counterattacks, leaving marks on the guard's massive body. Tang Meier and the others held their breath, watching the fierce battle unfold within the hall, their eyes full of concern. Qing, meanwhile, sneered as he watched the scene. He wasn't in a hurry and seemed unusually relaxed. No matter what tricks Mu Chen and Luo Li had, they were still human, and they would eventually grow tired. But the Divine Wood Guard would not. It would execute its orders perfectly, continuing until Mu Chen and Luo Li were completely killed. Moreover, Mu Chen and Luo Li could never outlast the Divine Wood Guard in terms of stamina. When their spiritual energy was exhausted, Qing could easily deal with them with a single finger. For now, this was just a show, and the outcome was already in his hands. Boom. A massive fist suddenly shot toward Mu Chen, but before it could land, a graceful figure appeared in front of him. Sword chi surged like a tidal wave, blocking the terrifying fist wind. In the moment Luo Li intervened, Mu Chen's figure shot out like lightning. The dragon shadow appeared beneath his feet, winding and twisting as though it pierced through space. His figure, moving like a ghost, darted toward the Divine Wood Guard's forehead. However, as Mu Chen's figure shot forward, the Divine Wood Guard immediately sensed the movement. Its massive mouth opened wide, letting out a roar as a terrifying surge of spiritual energy erupted like a radiant light beam, instantly engulfing Mu Chen. Buzz! Just as the light beam was about to strike Mu Chen, his body trembled, dark light enveloping him, and a massive black tower materialized around him, shielding his body within. Clang! A sound like the ringing of a bell echoed through the great hall, as if forged from metal. The black tower quickly dissipated, and Mu Chen's figure appeared at the forehead of the Divine Wood Guard. He clenched his palm, and a sheet of black paper appeared in his hand, emanating a mysterious power. Boom. It seemed the Divine Wood Guard sensed a looming danger, for it ignored Luo Li's attack and swung its massive fist, like a mountain, roaring toward Mu Chen. The terrifying force shattered the air, distorting the space around it. The shadow descended, But Mu Qin showed no sign of retreating. Instead, as Tang Meier and the others gasped in alarm, he charged forward. Seeking death, Zhenqing sneered maliciously. Boom. The giant fist finally slammed into Mu Qin's body. The force was so immense that Mu Qin's body was sent flying like a cannonball, crashing into a massive pillar, causing deep cracks to spread through it.